Important events are included in history books so we can learn what happened in the past and avoid making the same mistakes. You'll find the most significant historical events in history books. However, there are rare unseen moments that haven't been recorded or photographed. These pictures didn't make the history books, even though they should have. Roller coaster test. Death row inmates have rights today that they didn't have in the 40s or 50s. This is a photo of a death row inmate testing the safety of a roller coaster in 1958, and it looks extremely dangerous. Although using death row inmates this way was common back then, it would never happen today. Operation Baby Lift. The Vietnam War resulted in many deaths on both sides and plenty of destruction. Many parents died when the Vietnam War ended, leaving many orphaned babies in the country. The United States government decided to step in, and they flew the babies back to America on April 12, 1975 to help them find homes. People in the US, Australia, Canada, and France adopted the children, giving them a better life. The photo shows a nurse holding an orphaned baby and other babies with the nurses on board to care for them. The U.S. saving the babies was an incredible gesture, and sadly, we can't expect this kind of care from today's government. Ham the Chimp. Before we could put a human in space, Ham the Chimp helped the space program. Ham was the first humanoid to go to space and come home safely. His contribution helped pave the way for Neil Armstrong to walk on the moon and every space expedition since. Ham looks delighted to be home, and he came home a hero. Flight attendants inspired fashion. You can tell which passenger on your flight is the flight attendant because of the uniforms they wear. Today, men and women can be flight attendants and dress very differently than the 70s, and their job titles changed. Years ago, they were called stewardesses and had to be pretty and partake in weekly weigh-ins to ensure they didn't gain weight that could affect their appearance. In this photo, Brigitta Lindman, a Swedish stewardess, represented stewardesses as fashion inspiration, and she was on the cover of Life magazine. Today, flight attendants are more focused on passenger comfort and safety and have nothing to do with fashion. Coming home. The Vietnam War caused many deaths and destruction, and many soldiers were imprisoned by their enemy. Many American soldiers were held captive for years by the Viet Cong in the 70s and kept from their families. Operation Homecoming was a significant event because the United States traded their imprisoned Viet Cong soldiers for American soldiers, and they were reunited with their families. This is a photo of Lieutenant Colonel Robert Sturm coming home to his family after 6 years in captivity. When he returned to the U.S., he won the Burst of Joy Award. It was one of the most beautiful and touching moments that came from that horrible war. Kidnapped by a Native American tribe. Many years ago, Olive Ann Oatman and her sister were kidnapped by a Native American tribe. Olive was only 14 years old, and a Mojave chief adopted her, and she grew up with the tribe. As part of the tribe, Olive was required to get a tattoo on her chin, as seen in this photo. Years later, word spread about a white girl living with the tribe, and the U.S. government decided to do something about it. Olive was allowed to return home in exchange for horses and blankets. Video games of the 80s. People today play video games on their phones, and they play with people all over the world. Back in the 80s, gaming wasn't quite so easy, and you needed a TV which was large and bulky and a game console. This is a photo of the National Space Invaders Championship in 1980, and over 10,000 gamers were competing in the championship. A video game tournament today would look a lot different. James Dean and Little Bastard. Everyone loved James Dean in the 50s. He was a gorgeous bad boy who had many iconic acting roles during his career. Sadly, James' life was cut short after an accident in his car, Little Bastard, and he died on September 30th, 1955. Little Bastard was considered to be cursed after James' death, and when strange things continued to happen with the car. This is a photo of James sitting in Little Bastard at a gas station in 1955, not long before James lost his life. A giant ray? In 1935, A.L. Kahn took a photo of a giant 5,000-pound ray, and it was massive. Some people wondered if the ray was real or if Kahn faked the shot. Many people believed it was real and were terrified to swim, worried they'd run into another creature this size. Beer for all. Prohibition prevented Americans from consuming alcohol from 1920 to 1933. The government believed prohibiting alcohol would reduce crime and corruption and solve social problems. The 18th Amendment was added to the Constitution, which banned the manufacture, transportation, and sale of intoxicating liquors. Many disagreed with this, and many found ways to produce and drink alcohol secretly. If the police discovered or heard about alcohol use or manufacture, they were required to respond immediately. This is a photo of a bootlegging brewery in Detroit that was raided by the police. They opened the vats of beer and allowed it to spill all over the floor, and there was so much that it came pouring out the window. This was the opposite of what they wanted because residents nearby could fill buckets with beer without the police knowing. Honest Abe before and after the Civil War. Being the President of the United States comes with a lot of work and stress. No U.S. president had it harder than Abraham Lincoln because of the Civil War. The northern states believed slavery should be abolished, while the southern states believed slavery should continue, and the Civil War began. The photo on the left is Abraham Lincoln before the Civil War, and the one on the right is him after the Civil War. You can clearly see the toll the war took on him and his appearance. The Mushroom Cloud. On January 27, 1951, the first air-dropped nuclear device was tested at Frenchman Flat, a dry lake bed in the Nevada test site. This photo shows the test, and it took the shockwave precisely 16 milliseconds to travel from the explosion point to the camera. If anyone had been in the area, they wouldn't have had time to escape. The end of segregation. Many years ago, African-American students weren't allowed to attend the same schools as white students. When the U.S. Constitution was amended to provide equal student rights, everyone was allowed to go to the same schools. This is a photo of Dorothy Counts, the first student to attend an all-white school. Sadly, the other students bullied and intimidated the young lady, and she left the school after only 4 days. Fortunately, things got easier over time, and there are no segregated schools today. Early cosmetic surgery. Cosmetic surgery is so common today that people often block off just one day for the surgery and come out looking much better than before. In 1917, the earliest form of cosmetic surgery was invented, and the procedure was called the skin flap. The man in the photo, Walter Yao, suffered severe battle wounds on his face, and doctors repaired his face using skin flaps. It looks like he's wearing a mask, but the surgery was considered a success. Skin flaps paved the way for the cosmetic surgical procedure we use today. Fight Club. In the 30s, women weren't recognized in the world of sports. There were no female teams or athletes because men believed they dominated sports and women weren't allowed. This is a photo of a group of women's rights activists in Sweden taking boxing classes. They weren't allowed in the gyms and created their own fight club for sport to show men that women can do the same things men do. Babe Ruth. Babe Ruth is one of the most iconic and remembered baseball players. He started with the Red Sox and they sold him to the Yankees for $100,000, which was a huge mistake. Babe Ruth hit 700 home runs during his baseball career, and this is a photo of him hitting his 700th home run in 1934. The game occurred on Friday the 13th, proving this isn't an unlucky day. Tallest man in the world. Robert Wadlow was the tallest man in the world, standing at 8 foot 11 inches tall. His height earned him the nicknames the Alton Giant and the Giant of Illinois. This is a photo of Robert lying beside an average-sized man, showing how tall he really was. According to reports, his height was due to an enlarged pituitary gland. The horror of racism. The 60s were a time of racial conflict, and it wasn't uncommon to witness racist behavior. Martin Luther King Jr. did his best to fight back against racism, despite how hard it was for him. This photo was taken in 1960. When King Jr. came out of his house, he found crosses that the KKK burned on his front lawn. This was an unfortunate time in American history.